she's also a he?
More.
More.
I like more.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm bisexual, actually.
Oh.
Yeah.
I go both ways.
Hello and welcome to Bisexual Breakdown, where we have breakdowns as we break down pop culture. My name is Serena, and as usual, I'm here with my co-host Katie.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about something that we've touched on in previous episodes about whether or not we think that straight actors or straight creators should participate in the creation of queer art. And that led to a broader discussion about what we think straight people's role is in queer liberation and how much space they should be taking up in queer spaces and, what we think their role is as allies of the queer community. So, Katie, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, so we did touch on this topic a little bit when we were talking about Red, White, and Royal Blue. I'm not sure if either of those actors has come out and said what their sexuality is, but
not that we've been looking it up.
No, not that I Google search that every single. No, I'm kidding. I don't actually do that because what we're kind of getting to here is that I think that both of us are on the same page when it comes to this topic, which is that it shouldn't matter and it doesn't really matter to us.
Yeah. And I'm not even sure if that's a hot take or if that's a controversial opinion. Because I know some people feel very strongly about how only trans people should play trans roles. And there's been a lot of discussion about, or speculation about the sexualities of actors who have been in gay roles recently and whether or not, they identify in the same way as their characters and whether they have the quote unquote right to portray that role.
I think it's one of those topics that is really sort of dividing the community because I've seen a lot of people saying both sides, you know what I mean? I think there was I don't even remember who it was, but there was a podcast interview that went viral a while ago of someone complaining that the actors in Red, White, and Royal Blue were both played by straight men, which again, I don't think that's been confirmed. So step one is not assuming people's sexuality. And I think there was an equal amount of people kind of agreeing as well as an equal amount of pushback. I will say I feel differently. Obviously, I'm not a trans person, so I can't speak for that aspect or that letter of the LGBTQ community, but I do feel like it's different. And what I've seen a lot of people express is that the reason that they feel that it's different is because when you cast a cis man to play a transgender woman in a movie or a TV show or whatever, what you're essentially saying is that you believe that this person is a man. Does that make sense? It would be different if a cis woman was cast to play a trans woman because that's what they are. They're a woman, so it would make more sense for a woman, but that's not usually what they do in movies is they have a cis man playing a trans woman in a movie. That's exactly what happened when, I don't remember the name of that movie, but the one that Eddie Redmayne played what was the name of that movie?
I don't know.
But anyways, he did play a trans woman in a movie.
The Danish Girl.
Yes, The Danish Girl, which I've never seen. And I heard that it was actually good, but it is one of those things where it's kind of insulting because you're saying, yeah, a trans woman is just a man wearing a wig and makeup and a dress, which isn't a true reflection of the experience of a trans woman. I understand that. And I do feel like it's a different experience. And I think that the same argument can't be made for a straight person playing a gay role.
Do you think it has more to do with maybe race and disability? Because those things, those identities have visual cues in the same way that being trans also has some visual cues. Whereas a cis person who has a non-straight sexual orientation, that's purely internal. There are no visual cues necessarily. You can't tell just by looking. Do you think that's what
Yeah.
makes it different?
I do think that that is a big part of it. There are visual cues. I think the big thing is that the way that non-trans people view trans people is they're expecting to see visual cues. So
Mhm.
when trans people are represented in media, there are always visual cues, I would say.
Mhm.
I don't know if I've ever seen a trans person in a role. Oh, this isn't true. I shouldn't say that, but I would say like very rarely do I see a trans person in a role played by a cis person where they're like fully passing, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Whenever like a cis person plays a trans person in a role, they're not fully passing. They're like very obviously meant to have those visual cues that give them up as
Mhm.
being trans. There's like a few characters that I can think of that there aren't visual cues. Like one I'm thinking of is Laverne Cox, like in Orange is the New Black.
Mhm.
But and yeah, there's like a few others, but I think that's kind of like one of the issues is like, yeah, they're like putting that expectation of like trans people don't have to pass. That's not like a requirement. But I'm also
Yeah.
saying that like that should be their decision and not down to the decision of someone who's like writing a movie and casting a cis person to play a trans person in a movie.
I don't feel qualified to weigh in on this topic at all because like I think that trans people should speak on this, and since that's
Yeah.
not my experience, I don't think that I'm entitled to an opinion.
These opinions aren't really like necessarily coming from me. They're coming from opinions that I've seen other trans creators put
Mhm.
out online.
Is there some kind of consensus among trans actors, trans creators about how they think that trans people should be portrayed? And they think that straight people playing trans roles is not acceptable.
I mean, I really think that if you would speak to most trans people, they would say that they don't think that cis people should play trans roles.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the general consensus that I have seen.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That makes sense.
but I think bringing it back to what we're going to kind of focus on the most in this episode, it's similar. I mean, so trans people can also exist on a spectrum, and I don't want to like get into that too much because, again, being non binary, I do think a lot of people consider that on the spectrum of being
Mm-hmm.
trans. I don't know if I feel comfortable like putting myself in with that community because I know that they have a lot of experiences that I do not experience. But I do think that with regards to straight people playing queer roles, is that it's a really difficult thing to police because sexuality is such a spectrum
Mm-hmm.
and there are no visual cues that let you know if someone is queer despite all of like the stereotypes and stuff that sometimes
Right.
our own community like like sometimes we're our own worst like enemy when it comes to that kind of stuff where we're like we see someone wearing something and we're like, oh my god, that's so queer coded. I do it, I know you do it because we talk about
Yeah.
it sometimes and it's like fun, like it's not serious, but I do think that really genuinely there's no real like visual clues that will let you know if someone is queer. And so I think that it's really limiting to have that as a rule that like only straight actors can play queer roles
Mm-hmm.
or only queer actors can play queer roles is what I meant to say. I know that you agree with me on that, and there's like a bunch of different reasons why. One of them I know that we agree on is because I think that it can open people up to the possibility of them not being fully straight.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, well, first of all, how do you even enforce something like that on an industry level, right? Like, how can you make it a rule that only queer actors can play queer roles? I think in many countries, in the West at least, I don't think employers are even allowed to ask about your sexual orientation. So, just kind of like from a legal and logistical standpoint, it's not a realistic expectation. But then, yeah, also, I mean, we've talked about how like embracing one's sexuality and identity is a journey. And some people, take longer to figure this out. And so I feel like, there are people who are participating in the creation of queer media who might not have fully come to terms yet with that identity? And does that mean that they shouldn't be allowed to participate in the creation of queer media? Like, I don't think that that's appropriate, because art is a way of people processing their feelings and their experiences, and it's a way of learning about yourself and how you relate to the world. And so, I mean, I really don't think that it's fair to say that, you know, you can only participate in telling these kinds of stories if you meet this very narrow set of criteria. It's really limiting to like the human experience and to the creation of art.
Yeah, I was going to say the biggest reason I can think of that I don't think it's ethical to only cast queer actors in queer roles is that, yeah, you start getting into a lot of like sticky, muddy, like situations where you're expecting actors to reveal their sexuality when maybe they don't want their sexuality to be well known. There was a huge issue with that with Heartstopper.
Mm-hmm.
Connor, who plays Nick in that show, wanted to keep his sexuality to himself.
He's really young. I mean, like at that time, he was only 18.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, you know, you're an 18-year-old and you're still figuring stuff out about yourself. God, I remember being 18, like, you just don't know anything about anything yet, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, he's trying to figure himself out and he kind of wanted to keep that to himself, which is totally his prerogative. Like, why should anybody on the internet and beyond know anything about an 18-year-old's sexuality? Like, I think especially in that situation, it was particularly like egregious because the creator of the comic or the graphic novel, Alice Oseman, as well as like the director and the casting director, they all were very upfront with the fact that they were casting as genuinely as they could for every single role, and he was playing a bisexual character. And I feel like any normal rational person would see those things and assume that he was in some way part of the community in
Mm-hmm.
whichever way it was, whether he was bisexual or gay or just whatever. Like, I don't know, people really got upset at the thought that possibly he was like a straight actor playing a bisexual character. And they got so angry to the point where he felt like he needed to come out and tell everyone that he is bisexual, which is a win for the bis. I'm not gonna deny that. But
But terrible for him.
exactly. You shouldn't have to feel like that, even if you're someone who is in the public eye. Like, they don't owe us that information. So yeah, you're getting into a whole like muddy situation where it's like if every queer character is having to be played by a queer actor, then that is forcing people who want to keep some kind of bit of privacy with their personal lives, making them be public with information about themselves. I just don't think that's right. And I know, like you touched on, it's not even legal. Like, this is a job for actors. They have a union. They're not allowed to ask people their sexuality when you interview for a job. And that is for any industry, including this industry. So it's just not like moral or logical in any way.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, in our previous episode, when we talked about Merlin and fandom, you know, we were talking about queer baiting. And queer baiting is a media literacy term. And it's so funny that people have used queer baiting to refer to people who won't disclose their sexuality to the public. Like, that's just ridiculous.
I do think that there are some celebrities that kind of like use the queer community in certain ways that I'm not like totally comfortable with, but I wouldn't necessarily call that queer baiting
Yeah.
because, like you said, it's like that term in particular refers to pieces of media, and I don't think that people, like real life people, can queer bait. But yeah, I mean, for less like serious and like legal reasons, I do think that allowing straight people to play queer roles, just it's like a very human experience to be LGBTQ. Allowing straight people to experience that on some level can be very profound for them. And it also is a little bit like if we were to only cast queer people in queer roles, it just seems like we wouldn't always get the right actor for the part.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just because you're queer doesn't mean that you can necessarily portray all the other aspects of that character's personality, right? I mean, because like characters are more than just their sexuality, and you can relate to that specific part of them and portray that well, but you might not be able to represent like the totality of what that character is in that role, and somebody else might be able to do it better. And I don't think that having queer romantic feelings is necessarily something that a straight actor would not be able to access on some level. Like, you know, if you're a good actor who does their research, who listens to the experiences of people who are similar to their character, I think that they can, you know, tap into those feelings and put themselves in the shoes of that character and give an authentic portrayal. I mean, that's what acting is, right? Like you don't necessarily experience firsthand everything that you're portraying, but it's something that you can learn like through our shared humanity and through, you know, research to be able to give, you know, a compelling performance.
One thing that I really worry about in this whole topic of straight actors playing queer roles is just because I feel like I'm a little bit of a realist or maybe a pessimist, I don't know, but I can just picture the pushback from shitty conservatives who, if this really like became a big deal, there's a lot of queer actors who play straight roles. And do you think that like the shitty conservatives are going to be happy about gay people playing straight roles? It's going to be like a whole pushback from shitty conservatives being like, well, only straight actors can play straight
Mm-hmm.
roles. You know what I mean? And that's like, I can just like picture that happening because there's been so much pushback on other progress made. I don't know. Maybe that's me like overreacting or thinking too much about it, but I just feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's something that would become an issue. And, you know, like I said, there's a lot of queer actors who play straight roles, like
Yeah.
Jonathan Bailey,
In Bridgerton. Yeah.
yeah, for being in Bridgerton, where he plays a straight character. And then when everyone realized he was gay, it was like a big news story. He got accused. Did you know that he got accused of pretending to be gay?
What? No, I somehow missed that.
I saw an interview with him. I think it was around the same time that he won. What award did he win? I can't even remember now. But he won an award for fellow travelers. And he was talking about how someone tried to blackmail him to be like, I know you're not actually gay. He was like, pardon? Which is like kind of a funny thing because I feel like many years ago it would have been the opposite, where someone was getting blackmailed because they're like, oh, we know you're gay. And it's like now someone's getting blackmailed because they're like, we don't think you're actually gay, which is terrible, but also kind of funny.
Yeah. He plays a straight man very convincingly on Bridgerton.
Yeah, and it's like he should be allowed to play straight roles, and queer people should be allowed to play straight roles, and straight
Yeah.
people should be allowed to play queer roles.
I think one of the issues also is a question of opportunities. If there's a straight actor playing a queer role, it's like you're potentially taking that opportunity away from a queer actor who in general have, you know, more barriers to getting roles or jobs in general. But I think the solution to that is not to, you know, limit who can play what, but just to expand the roles that are available to tell, you know, more diverse stories and to remove the barriers from participation so actors can play, you know, a variety of roles and it's not limited by how you identify or your sexual orientation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that actually, because we started off this conversation talking about Red, White, and Royal Blue, I believe that the director of that movie, Matthew Lopez, kind of talked about that because he was asked about this topic about straight people playing queer roles. And as you know, he is himself a gay man. He is kind of on the same page as us. He kind of said, like, they brought in like a ton of people to audition for both of these roles, and these are the two actors who were the best suited for these roles, and
Mm-hmm.
that is they look at, a number of different things. It's like looks, it's ability, it's all of these different things, right?
It's chemistry with each other.
It's chemistry with each other. That was a big one. And it's about queer actors getting the opportunity to get into the room. If we're talking about issues of like equality in casting, then I don't think like you said, I don't think the right move is saying, well, only queer actors can play queer roles. It's like, that's not it. It's making sure that they have the equal opportunity. It is like a deeper rooted issue than just casting queer people in queer roles. It's like they need to be given the opportunities, they need to be given the resources, and they need to be able to get their foot into the room to be cast, and not just being cast as sort of like I want to say like a pity
in a tokenistic
thing.
kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. Like a token, like, oh, well, we just like need to find a gay person to fill this role. So I guess we're going to give it to this person. Like that to me doesn't feel good. And it doesn't really feel like equality. It feels like, oh, I guess we have to do this. So let's just do whatever. And we want queer stories to be good. Like we want quality.
Yeah.
And so we want the best people for those roles. And maybe sometimes that's not going to be a queer person.
And I just want to say that like people discover things about themselves over time at different points in their lives. And maybe, people who are drawn to queer or queer adjacent art do so because it resonates with them on some level. And maybe they're working through some complicated queer feelings. I was thinking about Abby Jacobson, who is the co-creator and star of A League of Their Own, which is an Amazon Prime series about a World War II women's baseball team, which features a variety of sapphic characters. And it's based on the iconic 1992 movie of the same name. And anyway, so Abby Jacobson spoke at a human rights event a couple of years ago, and she talked about how she only realized she was bi when she was 32. And her talk was about the importance of queer representation in media. And she said if she'd seen her show when she was a kid, it would have changed her whole life. And I felt that deep in my soul. So I'm a few years older than she is, and it also took me a long time to figure out that I was bi and to fully embrace that identity. And precisely because I grew up in a different time when we had little to no representation in the media. And the discourse wasn't what it is now. Like I didn't really have any examples or even the vocabulary to talk about my feelings and experiences. Anyway, I'm veering off topic, but the reason I brought up Abby Jacobson is because she's an example of an actor who didn't identify as queer until later in life. And I think there are many people for whom that journey takes longer. And so you don't really know what's going on with someone in their heads or in their personal lives, how they identify. And they don't owe you that explanation in order to participate in the creation of art.
Yeah, and there's also the movie Love, Simon, which came out several years ago. One of the actors also on that movie like realized that he was queer when he was filming that movie. So Keenan Lonsdale,
Yeah.
he realized that he wasn't straight when he was filming that movie. There's something to allowing people to explore, and I think that this even just goes beyond like actors. Like I don't think that only actors should like have this experience of being able to like be in touch with the queer community, because I feel like that's how people realize stuff about themselves. Like even before I knew I was always like hanging out with people in the community. And I think that that's what led me to eventually realizing that about myself. And when you kind of like put up that wall of separation of like, well, you can't like participate in our culture, then like some of the people who might have realized that they're not as straight as they once thought wouldn't realize that about themselves. And I feel like that's especially true for bisexual people, because it can be particularly confusing because you're like, well, okay, I do have feelings.
So I guess I'm straight. I mean, because of, compat, like you're kind of conditioned to think, well, I'm quote unquote, I'm normal.
And I think that can be a pretty different experience for people who are gay or lesbian, because I can't really fully speak for them. But yeah, it feels like that you're having these other experiences. And so just even if you're not in contact with the queer community, you could maybe still figure it out. But yeah, the compet, when you're not in any sort of communication with the queer community, can just take over. You're just like, yeah, I'm attracted to men, so I must be straight, even though you do have that little bit of like a suspicion that you also
Yeah, it's so easy to gaslight yourself that, like, no, everybody's a little bit gay. That's just all that is.
Exactly. Which I feel like we're kind of moving into the next topic I wanted to talk about anyways. What straight people's role is in like queer spaces, because I do think that straight people have a place in queer spaces, but I do also feel like that's kind of a loaded topic because,
Mhm.
well, what I wanted to bring up was, if anyone listening is on TikTok, there was this whole drama. I don't know when this was, maybe like a month or so ago. Basically, what happened was someone put up a video on TikTok talking about how she was recently at a lesbian bar in New York. Bar is called Cubbyhole Bar, which is a lesbian bar in the West Village neighborhood, and it's been around since 1994. And I mean, I've never been there. I'm not from New York, but I have heard that it's like a very, very small bar. It's like just like really, really small. And I don't know if anyone has like kept up with this. There's just like a dwindling number of bars that exist that are specifically just for lesbians. Like they have been closing rapidly. And so the amount of spaces specifically for sapphic people is just like very low. Even in like a large city like New York, like they just don't have a lot of spaces that are for them, right? Anyways, so she was at this bar and her straight friend, she said that he just came in for a few minutes to like say hello. And while he was in there, I guess a woman at the bar like approached him to ask him what he was doing there. And they both felt like she was being really aggressive and saying that he like didn't belong there, even though there were like a bunch of gay men in the bar. I guess this woman pegged him as being straight or was like mad at the fact that he was there. And so she says in the video, but like there's no rules against that. I was just curious, are straight males not allowed to go to a lesbian bar? And so this video like blew up on TikTok. I kind of missed the original video when it was posted, but
Mhm.
I saw like a ton of responses to it.
Is the general consensus no, that they're not allowed in lesbian bars?
I saw a combination of that, of like, no, they just shouldn't be there. But I also saw a lot of people saying that if they were there, it needs to be like a respectful thing and it always needs to be at the comfort of the people who are intended for that space.
Mhm.
There's a comment on that video that someone left that says, no, they are not. And straight women who prioritize a man's comfort over lesbian safety are also not welcome at the lesbian bar. I hope this helps, which is kind of funny.
I mean, are straight women allowed in lesbian bars? I mean, should lesbian or sapphic spaces be exclusively for lesbians and sapphics?
I find that such a hard thing to have. Like, I'm just not a very black and white person, if you know.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm very much like a gray area kind of person. Like I'm someone who's like, okay, like I get that, but I just always feel like there's going to be exceptions to that rule. So I don't feel
Mhm.
comfortable being like, no, they never should, because of what we've already been discussing. Like if you completely cut off your community from quote unquote straight people, like what if those quote unquote straight people aren't as straight as they thought?
Right.
And so it's definitely, I think what it comes down to for me is the level of respect that's being
Mhm.
shown.
Yeah.
Another comment on this video that says, politics of straight people being in a queer space aside, you can see why it would be a problem in a space as small as Cubbyhole for you two to be occupying what is otherwise space for queer women, which I think is kind of like an important thing to think about, where it's like if you're in a bar that's meant for lesbians to be in and the bar is already super small and there's already a dwindling number of spaces that are strictly for lesbians, and it's like maybe you do kind of need to stop and think to yourself, well, do I really need to be there, especially
Mhm.
if you are someone who's not really like questioning your sexuality or feeling like I think that's something that you maybe need to ask yourself. It's like, why do I want to be in this space so much? And why do I want to invite someone in here who, especially like bringing like a straight man into that space, it's like you need to think about how that affects the people that that space is intended for. And I will say that also the person who confronted the straight guy at the lesbian bar responded. She like posted a video being like, "Hey, I was the person that this woman is talking about. I was the one who like called her out for having her straight friend in there." And I guess that the story is a little more complicated than what the original video was saying, which is that like she had an interaction with him because he was blocking the door to the washroom or to the bathroom. Sorry,
Mhm.
washroom is a very Canadian term, to the bathroom. And she kind of said that he seemed like really grumpy and then asked him if he was there with someone. And the guy said, "Well, if I wasn't here with someone, would that be a problem?" And then she said, "Well, it would be a problem. Like, this is a lesbian bar." And then I guess that all of the girls that he was with got really mad at her and were like, "Why would you say that? That's so messed up."
Were the girls he was with, I mean, were they lesbians?
No, they were straight women. I don't know, like, it doesn't say specifically if there was anyone in that group that was a lesbian. I know that he was with the woman who made the original video who is straight. So I don't know if they were there because they were with someone who is a lesbian. But as the woman who posted like the response video said in the video, she was like, "I want literally nothing to do with straight people, which is why I'm in Cubbyhole in the first place."
I mean, that's fair. But
Yeah,
there are lots of, general population bars. Like, why do you have to be there specifically?
yeah. And I think what she also says is, "I have seen a lot of cis straight guys come into this bar and cause problems. It's a known thing. There are straight dudes that come into these bars specifically because they're trying to pick up girls. So I wasn't trying to instigate anything. I was just trying to safety check."
And that's fair. I mean, I don't think that he should have taken offense because he is entering a space that's not intended for him. And so, like, he should defer to the comfort of the people for whom that space exists. And I think that's just being like a respectful person.
Yeah, and I kind of think again that's like the crux of the matter for me is like if you're entering a queer space, I feel like and if you don't identify as queer, it's like you should be asking yourself, why do I feel the need to be here? What am I taking away possibly from queer people or like what am I adding to this situation, I guess? But then also that it's like just a thing of like respect. If you are entering a queer space and trying to be respectful, then you need to act with respect and you need to understand why it is that your presence might make the people there uncomfortable. And it's like,
Mhm.
if you are there as a straight man in particular with the intention of like cruising, because I that's like a whole thing and we won't even get into it in this of like men trying to pick up lesbians, like that's a whole other thing that's like weird and gross.
Why would you even do that?
I don't know. It's like a whole thing. I don't understand straight men, and I'm not going to pretend to, but that is like a whole thing for them. It's that like, unfortunately, I feel like straight women kind of do it too. Of that whole like, oh, like I'm so special that I could like turn them. You know what I mean? Like, because I feel like I've seen straight women do the same thing with like gay men. It's just really gross, and I don't know, I hate it, but that is something that they do partake in. And so I think again it's like if that's the reason that you're entering a space meant for lesbians, then obviously you should not be there.
I think that, like, lesbian bars are one thing, but what about movements like Pride? What do you think is the appropriate way for straight people to participate in Pride if you think that they should at all?
I have complicated feelings on this. Do you have like any specific opinions on straight people at Pride?
I mean, again, it comes down to respect, right? And are you making anyone uncomfortable? Are you taking up space that should be for someone else because it's not really your community? Like, are you centering yourself when you shouldn't be? But in general, I don't think that, categorically they shouldn't be allowed at Pride. I think that like there is a role for allies, and so I work in policy advocacy, and allyship is really important when we're talking about legislation and changing policy. Like if you can demonstrate broad-based support beyond just the community, and I think that makes for a very powerful force for change. So from that perspective, I think that absolutely there is a role for allies to participate in advocacy for LGBTQ plus rights. It comes down to like, how is that allyship expressed? Is it respectful, and is it in consultation with those communities, and how do they feel about it? Because, it's not, the queer community is not a monolith. There are different groups within it who feel many different things about many different topics. And so it's like, which people and which groups are you interacting with, and how do they feel about it? And I think the most important thing is really just to listen more, to talk less, and to decenter yourself, and use whatever privilege you have to amplify the voices of queer people in the way that they want. And it's up to them to define what they think your extent of participation should be. You shouldn't be coming into those spaces with your own kind of agenda. You should approach it in a way that is like, well, I'm here to support. Tell me how best I can do that.
Yeah, I think what you said about decentering is important, because I think that is why straight people feel like they have a right to be in queer spaces, is because they're kind of centering themselves. If you enter a queer space and you're kind of thinking to yourself like, well, I know why I'm here, and I know that I'm here to act a certain way, or I feel like I'm here for the right reasons. But like the other people in that space don't necessarily know that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're centering your knowledge and your experience around yourself, and you're not centering it around what the people who that space is intended for are going to feel about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult with pride because I said, like I said, I have complicated feelings about it, because the two parts of me that are at war are the two parts of me. One that knows that the first ever pride was a riot, which is like a very common kind of like phrase or saying in the community. And it's true, pride happens in June, which is the same month that the Stonewall riots happened in New York. And it is always going to signify that. And the first pride will always be a riot. And to me, when I think of pride as an act of like rebellion against like heteronormative society and heteronormative norms, I guess that's what pride is pushing back. And when I think about it like that, it makes me feel like no, straight people shouldn't be at pride. But the other part of pride is that it is sort of like a celebration of being who you truly are, wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard. And when you think of it that way, it kind of feels like straight people do have a place in that, especially if they are there playing like an ally role.
Yeah. And I mean, especially if they're family members who support their queer son or daughter or child or partner.
Yeah.
I think that they deserve to be there, and that support, also demonstrates to other family members. Like it's a positive example of like, how do you show up for the queer person in your life, and how do you demonstrate that?
Yeah, exactly. And again, I kind of feel like it all comes down to possibly you preventing someone from like learning something about themselves. Also, I kind of have this thing where I feel like I understand the people who want to keep the LGBTQ community as kind of closed off to like protect it. But then it feels like, how can you expect any sort of level of acceptance from the mainstream community when you won't even like let anyone in to see what it's like? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe part of it is they feel that society at large has not been welcoming, to them. And this is a space where their rules, and they define how they present themselves and participate in that space. And so like it's something that is truly owned by the community in a way that the other spaces that they inhabit aren't. And so, it's special in that way. And maybe like feeling like you have to share that takes away that feeling of specialness.
Yeah, like I said, I do feel those two different parts of me at war frequently. Part of me is so like radicalized where I'm like, fuck straight people. You know what I mean? Like I do truly feel like that sometimes, where I feel like they've done nothing for us. They Everything we have gotten has been fought for, and even the things that we do have are still being fought for. Like so many things that we thought we had are
Hmm.
being questioned and possibly taken away in various parts of the world. Especially, I mean, neither of us are American, but we're seeing a lot of that in the US right now. And being Canadian, it's a little scary because a lot of ideas from the US make their way up to Canada. And specifically, the province I'm in, the leader of our province was just seen like rubbing elbows with a very well known, extremely like radical conservative US
Yikes.
political member. And so that was extremely frightening for a lot of people in my province. And our premier also is trying to pass a bill that will basically target trans kids in school, where basically it's like a bunch of things that they always do this thing where they try to make it seem like it's going to be good for the student, but it's actually not. Like basically
Hmm.
what they're saying is that, oh, if the student decides that they want to go by different pronouns or go by a different name, they're going to notify the parents right away, and like a bunch of things like that, where they kind of try to make it seem like, oh no, we're like protecting this kids and students, and it's like, no, you're not. You absolutely are not. And then another big part of that bill is no surgery on anyone under the age of 18, which they were not doing anyways. But they also want to get rid of like hormone blockers for people under the age of 18,
Hmm.
which is just ridiculous because hormone blockers don't do any long term or permanent damage to a person who takes them. If you take hormone blockers, you just block those hormones until you stop taking them, and then the hormones continue as usual. So it doesn't really do anything long term or permanent to anybody. But they want to stop students and people who are under the age of 18 from accessing hormone blockers. Like I said, the ideas from the US kind of like sneak their way up into Canada frequently. And it's just like scary. Like I said, like I feel like so many of the things that we've fought for, that we have kind of maybe like taken for granted or felt like really safe and secure with, are kind of like,
Being threatened.
yeah, being threatened. And it feels like that part of me, when I think about all that stuff, I feel very like radicalized.
Uh-huh. I think I come from it from a little bit of a different perspective because I'm not American. I'm not from Canada. I live in Europe, but I'm from Asia and I'm from a very conservative country, which in terms of human rights and LGBTQ plus rights is much less advanced. Like we're not even anywhere near the discourse of what's happening in the West. Very basic rights for queer people. We've not even managed to legislate. So in my country, there is a bill that we've been struggling to pass for years that just ensures basically like queer people's right to exist in public spaces without violence or discrimination. It shouldn't be, your identity shouldn't be a barrier to education, to a job, to entering a commercial establishment. It's like really basic stuff. And we can't even get that passed. Like it's controversial because a lot of legislators feel like, oh, you give them, any bit of like recognition, then they're going to ask for more. And then we'll have gay marriage and all of these things. And absolutely not. And so when people show up at Pride, regardless of how they identify, and show support for the queer community, that's a powerful political statement. And I think that that's important in moving forward, important legislation like this very basic equality bill, And so I kind of think of it in like maybe pragmatic terms. And it's also like there are people in my life, back in my home country who don't really have a lot of interaction with queer people. So like how can you learn about and support a community that you've not really been exposed to. Like if you don't really have relationships with LGBTQ plus people, you don't know what their lives are like, what their experiences are like. How is society supposed to change? And so I think that like opportunities for people to come together and to learn about the community and to meet people and to kind of celebrate each other and learn about your shared humanity, that's important for social progress. And I think that, we can't really have that if we exclude everyone who's not LGBT from LGBT places.
Yeah, actually, you make a good point, and that's something that I do agree with that I haven't brought up yet, which is how powerful it is for someone who is maybe like afraid to come out for whatever reason, seeing even like a straight person at Pride supporting that can be like a very powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, support coming from within the community is important, but it's also important to see that support coming from people outside of the community.
Yeah.
And I do think that I am moved sometimes by like straight people supporting the queer community just because it's one of the like maybe this is like not the best way of thinking about it, but it kind of feels like one of those things where I'm like they don't have to do that, you know what I mean? A straight person could easily just like shut up about queer subjects and they don't have to comment on it at all. So when I guess I'm thinking specifically of straight people who have like a platform when they're particularly like outspoken about supporting LGBTQ rights and queer people, then I do think that that is like an important message. And I do think that it can reach a lot of people who are confused or people who are scared about being out. So, yeah, you know what that is? I mean, as much as I know and understand that queer people have had to fight a lot of their own battles, I do think that having that support from outside of the community is important.
Yeah, I think it also always just comes back to respect, right? Are you at Pride to show support, to push for the rights of the community, or are you just there because it's like because the queers throw a fun party and you want to have, you just want to be
Which
part
we
of it?
do, but
Yeah. Like, what are your motivations for being there? And like, how do you demonstrate that to other people? Like, do you make other people feel safe? Is your presence there disruptive? Does it make other people uncomfortable? Or, do they appreciate you because you're being respectful and you're centering them, not yourself?
this is kind of reminding me, this isn't strictly related to what we're talking about, but kind of, what about like brands? What about like companies, businesses at Pride?
I have strong feelings about this because I used to be part of this feminist organization, and I was a young activist, and I feel like now looking back at that experience, I feel that there were a lot of brands that kind of used me and my group to pink wash some of their campaigns. And so like we were basically used to kind of legitimize them, like, oh, we're feminist allies, whatever, and we were working with this group. And I didn't get paid for like consultation on like this marketing thing that this brand did, and I just like realized, oh, they're not really advancing women's rights in any
Mhm.
way. They're just selling their products, and then they used me to do that, and they didn't even pay me for my labor. And I was young and naive, and I thought, well, I'm doing this for a good cause. And now that I'm older, I'm just like, that was not cool. Like they didn't even compensate me for my time and my expertise. And ultimately, they didn't really contribute anything to women's rights. They just sold more of whatever it is they were selling. And so, what are the motivations and the messages that brands are putting out? Are they actually doing anything that advances the rights of the community, or are they just essentially in it for themselves? Not that those two things can't coexist, but I'm like very deeply suspicious now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's another one of those things that's kind of situational for me because I do feel like brands exist that are genuine in their support. One thing I can think of, I don't know if you have this brand where you live, but there's a vodka called Absolute. Do you know Absolute Vodka?
Mm-hmm.
They have supported the community even before it was kind of popular to do so. They started their campaign in the 80s, which is when the AIDS crisis was going on and everything. Obviously, that was like a very unpopular time to be supporting the community, but they were like one of the few brands that were and have been ever since. And so, yeah, I do feel like it's kind of situational. Like, do I think there's genuine support? Like, for sure. But then there is a lot of like, obviously, they've just found out that like they can sell product if they like slap a rainbow on it and
Yeah.
people are going to buy it because it's like pride themed, you know?
No, I mean, I would like to know, it's not just like, oh, they slapped a rainbow on something. What do they purportedly say their values are, and how do they demonstrate those values, right? Like, it's one thing to, it's easy to pay lip service and it's easy to wave a flag during Pride, but like, what are you doing the rest of the time? And how has
Mhm.
that actually benefited the community is what I'm looking at. And some brands are able to do that. Like, they're consistent and very sincere, and they support communities, or they donate, or that support is translated in other tangible ways that benefit the community, and that's great. But like, other people are just using it as a marketing opportunity. So I guess, yeah, it very much depends.
Yes, I agree. Like, sure, make the rainbow pride merch, but like we want to see the receipts. Like, where is this money going? Like, show us the proof that this is like going to like an organization. Like, I don't need Target making like millions of dollars off of the community when they're not like putting that back in any
Yeah.
meaningful way. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of us discussing queer issues relating to straight people in queer spaces. By the time this goes out, it'll have been well over a month since we posted our last episode, which we both have just been, you've been really busy because you just moved to a different country.
Yes.
I haven't so much been busy as just like unmotivated, I would say.
It happens.
Yeah, a bit of a rough patch in my productivity in many parts of my life, honestly, not just in podcasting. So, yeah, this one just took a little bit longer for us to get out, but hopefully it won't be as long of a wait for the next episode.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we want to talk about.
I know we have like a whole list of stuff. We just need to like get to it, but hopefully we'll get back into a rhythm now that we're kind of both settled maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are you hyper fixating on right now? What's been going on? We haven't like really talked in a while. So,
Yeah, I've been just kind of busy settling in, and I'm still living out of boxes, but like, it's getting a bit better. So my current hyperfixation is The Three Body Problem, which is both a book and a Netflix series that just came out that's based on the book. It's not very queer at all. There is one like queer minor character, but he's not very central to the plot, and he basically exists to demonstrate what a bad father figure one of the main characters is. I mean, he's very supportive of his gay son, but he's just like a bad father in other respects. But anyway, so The Three Body Problem is the first novel in a trilogy by Chinese science fiction author Liu Cixin. It was published in Chinese in 2008 and in English in 2014, I believe. And it won a Hugo Award in 2015. So the Netflix series is by David Benioff, D.B. Weiss, and Alexander Wu. And I've been kind of skeptical of it because Benioff and Weiss are the showrunners of Game of Thrones. And, we all know, or I think it's generally agreed upon, that the Game of Thrones finale was kind of a disaster. Game of Thrones was good until they ran out of books, and there's no risk of that happening here since the series is complete. So, I was willing to give it a chance, and the series is surprisingly good, especially as an adaptation for a book that lots of people thought was unfilmable. So much of it is theoretical and philosophical and happening inside characters' heads, like their thoughts. And it's just really hard to imagine how that would be interpreted visually, but I thought they actually did a pretty good job. So I don't know how to summarize this book or this trilogy, because it's really complex and sprawling. It covers like a very long time period. There are lots of different characters and events in it, but basically, the laws of physics are broken, and scientists around the world can't explain it. And it turns out aliens are invading Earth, but they're not arriving for another 400 years. But it's not just about humanity trying to stop this invasion. It gets into some really deep questions about science and religion and human civilization, and like the personal and political impact of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And the show touches on those themes, but doesn't really get that deep into it. It's kind of more action and like more fast paced than it is in the books. The show changes a lot of things. The book was primarily set in China, but in the show they switched the setting to mostly being in the UK, and there's lots of character changes. The timeline and the sequence of events has been sped up. I don't know, like more exciting for TV, I guess. But I think it's generally well done and makes for intriguing and entertaining television. Like, it didn't quite plunge me into the existential crisis that the books did, but like if they get a second season and have more time, maybe we'll see more of that. Like, I'm really interested to see where they take it. I think it's interesting, to see how they've taken certain themes from the book and translated that into TV. I think that's like a really difficult and complex thing to do. And just like as an art form, it's just fun to see like how do you interpret it in a more visual way. Anyway, so I'm really looking forward to more of the show and finishing the trilogy, because I'm only in book one, but it's been really great so far.
Nice. That sounds really interesting. So like, sorry, is it like sci-fi kind
Yeah,
of?
it's very
Yeah, it
sci-fi.
sounds okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I'm like constantly like that Leo DiCaprio pointing meme, because there are lots of like actors in the show that are well known from other things. And there's a bunch of like Game of Thrones actors in it as well.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Cool.
What are you hyperfixating on, Lady Katie?
I don't even know if I would call this like a hyperfixation because I guess I am a kind of hyperfixating on it, but I'm like I just got into like classic Hollywood movies.
Like, from what decade?
Kind of from like the 30s and 40s. Some of them might be like more like 50. Yeah, some of them are 50s, but I just found a list on Letterboxd. Like that's how I got
Mm-hmm.
into doing this because I was just looking around Letterboxd, which sometimes I do, and I found a list of classic Hollywood movies and I was like, "Oh, interesting." And I was just kind of like scrolling it and pretty much all of the movies that have Marilyn Monroe in it, I've already seen
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of those are like from the 50s. But there's a lot on there, just like movies that I've always kind of like meant to watch and that I just never have gotten around to. Like one of the first ones I watched was Roman Holiday that has
Mm-hmm. Audrey Hepburn?
Audrey Hepburn, yeah, and Gregory Peck. I don't know. It was just it was really cute. That's maybe been one of my favorites so far.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, like it was so cute. And there's been like one that I can think of that I can honestly say I didn't really like that much, which I was kind of disappointed by, was Casablanca, which I think is like a very like
Mm-hmm.
classic Hollywood movie. And I don't know. I
Is that the first time you've seen it?
Yeah, it was. I'm not like rewatching any of them. So like any of the ones I've already seen, I'm just kind of skipping because I'm like, well, I've seen this and there's a lot on there that I haven't seen. So figured I would just go for ones I haven't watched yet. But
So you just felt meh about Casablanca.
yeah, I don't know. And I feel bad because it is such like a classic.
I don't remember it at all. I mean, I watched it like when I was much younger, and I don't really remember it very much.
I just thought it was kind of boring. And like that line, the like famous line,
Mm-hmm.
I don't even really understand what it means. Like he says it like 3 or 4 times. And every time I'm like, what is like the context doesn't help this at all. Cause I still don't understand why he says that,
Wait, what line?
what it means. Here's looking at you, kid.
Oh,
He says that like 3 or 4 times.
I don't remember anything from the movie, so I have no context. I don't
Yeah,
remember
he just
anything.
keeps saying it. So, like, basically, what it is during World War II, a bunch of people get stuck in Casablanca in Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really hard to leave because of like the war going on. And so it's about like a guy, the main character, who runs a club in
Mm-hmm.
Casablanca, and then he just happens to run into this woman that he used to have like a love affair with. They got like separated and it was like a whole thing and now she's married or like involved with somebody else. But yeah, he says that to her like 3 or 4 times in the movie. And every time I'm like, what does this mean? And it's like a line that people repeat all the time. So I thought it was going to have some kind of like emotional or like significance to the plot or something. But every time he said it, I was just like, why is he saying that? I don't understand what it means. I don't know why he's saying it. Like every time I was just like, okay. So that's when I was like kind of bummed out because I was kind of excited for that one.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I'd heard really good things and I was like, you know what? This isn't great. But I've also watched Bringing Up Baby,
I've not seen that
which
one.
was really fun. It was really cute. I feel like it was like a little over the top at some points, but it's really fun to watch it and just see how you can just see how it's like affected kind of like modern day comedy, I would say. Like it's very slapstick, which I think is something that you don't really associate with movies that are older. It just
Hmm.
seems like they were all really like sophisticated and stuff like that. But no, it was really silly. So that one was fun. And I've also seen I watched Singing in the Rain for the first time.
Hmm.
And then I also watched It Happened One Night. That one was okay. I didn't mind that one. It wasn't my favorite. I think Roman Holiday is the one I like the most so far.
I really like that one. Do you have trouble watching old movies because they feel so dated, or like the acting or just, the conventions of filmmaking at the time? Like, is it difficult for you in any way to get into it?
Not really.
Hmm.
I will say it's funny when you watch old movies like that. And like I was watching Casablanca and like that won Best Picture at the Oscars for whatever year that was. It was like maybe the late 30s, I want to say, or early
Hmm.
40s. I don't remember. And I was just thinking, I was like watching it and thinking like, there's no way that this would win Best Picture now.
Hmm.
It's funny when you think about it in that way of like how different movies are now. I wouldn't say that it's hard for me to get into them. It's just like funny how different it is. And I would say like in a weird way, they're almost a little less like immersive.
In what way?
It feels more like you're just like watching a movie, if that makes sense. Like they're not like, I don't know, it's like hard to describe.
Hmm.
It's like I feel like that's just like a way that like filmmaking is now where they try to make everything so like immersive, like you're there and like the world is so vast and the characters they try to
Hmm.
make them so like personable and like or like relatable and kind of thing. And I kind of think that that's something that they didn't really think about when they were making movies back then.
Hmm.
Maybe because there was like less of them and now you kind of have to like really grab at people to like get their attention.
Hmm.
Whereas, back then people would watch whatever there was to watch because that's all that there was. And now we have so many choices that they have to work harder to like grab our attention, maybe. I don't know. One
Hmm.
thing that did take me out a little bit in It Happened One Night was just like, I know that it was different back then, but the main like male character he wasn't like actually physically abusive, but he threatened it a lot.
Hmm.
He was always like threatening violence against the main female character. And every time I was just kind of like, holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was typical for the time, and it doesn't
Yeah.
raise the same kind of eyebrows that it would today. It's the same. Like last Christmas, I was with my nephews who are like 10 and under, and we were watching like A Christmas Story, which was from 1983. My nephews were like so appalled at the way that children were treated in the movie, like they were being like physically abused and made to eat soap, and the kids were just like so horrified. It's like, why do they treat children this way? But it was like normal back then.
Like, oh, you're lucky you're growing up now and not back then.
Do you want to kind of maybe mention things that we're planning to discuss on the podcast, like so people have something to look forward to or what to expect in the coming episodes?
Well, I think we sort of discussed talking about Mary and George.
Yeah, I mean, since this is unofficially the Nicholas Galitzine podcast.
Unofficially. We should have made it official. That's fine. Because now we can talk about anything that we want to talk about. So it's better to be broad. But yeah. Yeah, Mary and George. And then, oh my gosh, in like almost exactly a month,
The
The
idea of you.
Idea of You comes out. And we're both sort of planning on reading that. I guess with it being a month away, we should probably get on that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm really interested to compare the book to the movie. The book isn't really something that I would normally be interested in. And
No.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound particularly good or appealing. I mean, at least to me, for some reason, they did something with the source material, and it seems to have like a really broad appeal and got really great reviews from South by Southwest. So I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I'm really kind of interested to see how they took that book and turned it into, like this lush rom com that people are raving about.
It has 12 reviews, all by like industry people who go to see a lot of movies, and it has 100% on Rotten
Yeah, that's
Tomatoes.
really surprising. Like I was prepared to love this movie no matter what and support.
I'm prepared to do any number of debasing things for Nicholas Gallatin.
But to see reviews that are actually raving about it, it's like, huh, okay.
I know, and I feel like tiny little bit of like guilt over feeling surprised that it's good. Because I'm like, oh, I shouldn't, that's like mean to be like, oh, I can't believe it's good. But like, genuinely, I kind of can't believe that it's getting good reviews like that. I was expecting it to be maybe like, like good reviews with some people who are just like, because there's always people who are just like negative about rom-coms,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, we are kind of those people, right? I mean, we are not
Yes, yes,
huge
yes,
fans
yes.
of like at least straight romantic movies or
Yeah.
books.
We are the people who are negative about it. You're so right. I mean, like, especially with people who review movies for a living, like, I just feel like there's always that like negativity about rom-coms, which again, as a low-key rom-com hater, I completely understand.
But on the other hand, it's Anne Hathaway and Nicholas Gallatin. Like, how can it be bad? Like, even when it's not good, it's still going to be, fun to watch.
If it's bad, it's still going to be Nick Gallatin and Anne Hathaway making out. So how bad could it possibly be?
Exactly. It's like the bisexuals just keep winning.
It's either a bisexual nightmare or a bisexual dream. I really haven't decided yet. But I do want to read the book because there's just like a lot of mystery surrounding it for me.
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of people say a lot of things about the book.
I was prepared to read it just to find out whether the rumor about the pegging scene was real or not.
I think that the pegging has been disproven, but
I'm very disappointed.
yeah, but there's a lot of other things. Like, I don't know, I just see a lot of people saying a lot of things, and you can't always trust the internet, or even just like people saying, "Oh, it's giving like these kind of vibes or whatever." And it's like no offense, like I don't want to be mean to people, but I just like don't really trust people's media literacy very much because I feel like that's a skill that's very much like going downhill. And I trust my media literacy skills. No offense to everyone else, but like I know I know what I'm about. And so I feel like I need to get all of the information from the source about like what this is going to be like. And I like that, like I like seeing the changes that people make.
Mhm.
And I've heard that there are like quite a few changes. Like I think they changed the ending.
Oh, interesting.
I've heard of what the ending is of the book, and so I just like really want to know what's been changed for the movie.
Well, we will find out. I mean, I'm looking forward to reading the book and seeing the movie and making comparisons and to see how much of it they've changed and adapted.
Yeah, we need to make plans to read the book for real.
Yeah, and we only have a month.
Book club, idea view book club.
As usual, thanks for listening. Our website is bisexualbreakdown.com, where you can find links to all the places you can listen to the podcast, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, YouTube, as well as links to all our social media. We are on Tumblr, Instagram, and TikTok, and we are Bisexual Breakdown across all of those platforms. You can leave us comments and feedback on any of those, or if you prefer, you can email us at bisexualbreakdown@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye for now. We are both bisexual. That's so true.